Um, Greetings. Thank you very much for listening to my talk. The title is Toddler Development and Autonomy. When we think about early child development, it ranges, we're going to be focusing on from conception through age 8. That's the first 1,000 days up to age 2, the second 1,000 days 2 to 5, and the third up to age 8. Children grow during this time, and children also develop. You can see them going from lying prone to running and jumping. During the toddler period, from ages 12 months to 36 months, there's a tremendous amount of development. Children go from walking to running. They go from barely learning to say words to saying sentences. They go from being fed to self-feeding, from baby food to the family diet, and from being dependent to independent dressing, toileting, and many, many other things. So it's a tremendous period of development. Children grow during the toddler period, but their growth slows down from infancy. What we have learned is that excess weight gain during toddlerhood stays with them, and it increases children's risk of overweight and obesity throughout life. In the US, almost 14% of children ages 2 to 5 are obese. We would expect 5%. So we have 2.5 times the number of children who are already overweight or obese rather, and are at risk. So toddlerhood is an ideal time to establish healthy dietary and physical activity habits. How do children learn? Well, there are 3 primary ways that they learn: by observation and imitation, by exploration, and by play. As you can see in the slide, I guess it's on your left, that children can imitate from the 2nd week of life. In this classic study, the examiner sticks out his tongue and the baby sticks out her tongue. So early on, children are very, very careful observers, and they want to imitate what they have seen. Then there's exploration. Children are fascinated, toddlers especially. They have to touch things. They want to put things in their mouth. They want to figure out how things work, so they explore. And children learn by playing. That's playing what they see. You can see the little girl feeding her doll because that's what she sees. And you can see the child reaching and climbing. So they learned through these 3 processes. If we look at observation and modeling, we see children doing what they see others doing. So here we see a little girl feeding her doll. Toddlers are also developing what we call autonomy. That means they want to do things themselves. So toddlers will learn to say no and I do it myself very early on. You can see that the child feeding himself, he wants to do it himself. They also have limited inhibitory control. That means that they're not good at waiting, and when they want something, they want it right now, which can also be dangerous. Toddlers will try to do what they see others doing, even if it's very dangerous. These are data from the US on the prevalence of unintentional deaths by 100,000 by age. So if you look at 2-year-olds, we have a prevalence of unintentional deaths of 9.9. When we look at 3-year-olds, it goes down to 6.7. And then from age 4 to 15, it's low. It's 3.9 per 100,000. At age 16, it goes up to 11. Why would it go up at age 16? Well, that's the age at which children can drive. So you can see the risk that toddlers have, that they will do things that put them in peril without realizing it. So it's a tremendous drive towards autonomy that young children have. If we want to influence toddler behavior, it's straightforward. We do it at home, their proximal environments, either at home or in childcare. So toddlers will model what they see others doing. So if you're interested in feeding, the solution would be eat together, and in physical activity, it's play together. So if we remember, toddlers will model what they see others doing. We'll talk a minute about language development. By age 3, toddlers can communicate in sentences. They have about 200 words. And the key is that other family members, non-family members, can understand them. So you can see in the graph the tremendous growth that happens in language and in vocabulary among toddlers. Toddlers learn by book sharing. That means that we use books to engage children in telling stories. And children learn very much from being engaged and having parents who are responsive and encouraging. If we think about feeding, complementary feeding starts at approximately 6 months. And during this time, this is when children are having foods other than liquid. There's a risk of micronutrient deficiencies because the micronutrients, iron in particular, from their mothers are no longer available. And at this point, children are crawling on the floor and putting objects into their mouths. So there are challenging hygienic practices. So the second 6 months can be a vulnerable time in terms of illness and growth faltering. And at the same time, children are very, very interested in exploring. So we see what complementary feeding can start to look like. And we'll talk a little bit more about complementary feeding. Baby-led weaning is when the complementary feeding involves children feeding themselves. So typically at about 6 months, when children are ready to advance beyond the liquid diet, both for their nutrient requirements and their physical and oral motor skills are developed, traditionally we have spoon-fed purees, as you see on the top. But in the past several years, baby-led weaning has gained popularity. So that's when babies feed themselves, as you see, with softened, bite-sized foods. The advantages to baby-led weaning are that there's maybe exposure to a wide variety of foods. Children are involved in direct contact. They're touching the foods. They're exploring multiple textures. And it may be related to self-regulation. They're eating when they're hungry, stopping when they're satiated or full, and it may build some autonomy and feeding skills. But there are potential disadvantages. And the question is, do they get adequate nutrient intake? There's a safety concern related to choking, and they can make a mess, as you can see in the pictures. So there is evidence around baby-led weaning from several reviews. These reviews either focus exclusively on baby-led weaning, or they compare traditional and baby-led weaning. So what the reviews tell us is that baby-led weaning typically occurs in the context of a family meal. So that means others are eating as well. Traditional feeding may or may not. Baby-led weaning is associated with self-regulation and satiety. And it appears that there's not a difference in the timing of the initiation of complementary feeding between baby-led and traditional feeding. The evidence thus far suggests an adequacy of weight gain. And it also suggests that there's not a difference in choking or micronutrient intake. But there's not evidence on the long-term impact on nutrient intake or eating patterns. So more needs to be learned about baby-led weaning. I would note that it's popular, particularly in England, New Zealand, and Brazil. Food neophobia is an issue that appears during toddlerhood, and you will hear more about food neophobia during the workshop. It's defined as a refusal or a fear to eat unfamiliar food. It's a very normal developmental phase in toddlerhood, and it may protect toddlers against food that could be harmful or could be bitter. Neophobia differs from pickiness. Pickiness is defined as specific food preferences and dislikes, regardless of familiarity. You can see the pictures on the right illustrate children that could be neophobic and could be picky. In either case, they're refusing or they're protesting the food that's offered. So both of these conditions, neophobia and pickiness, are associated with negative affect and can lead to conflict or feeding problems. I would say that neophobia is typically transitional, and children, it's a phase, but the negative affect can contribute to conflict within families. If we look at responsive feeding, it's a bidirectional concept. So what this means, this is how it works, that a baby whines, signaling hunger, a mother offers food, the baby opens her mouth, the mother gives a bite, the baby fusses and may look like this, ooh, a protest, and the mother may smile, offer finger food, and what we see then is the baby smile and accept food. So it's a back and forth process that illustrates that the baby's behavior influences the mother and the mother's behavior influences the baby. Of course, mother could be substituted for father, for grandmother, for another caregiver. The process is the same. It's a back and forth, what's sometimes called serve and return, but this feeding process cannot be evaluated in isolation because one depends on the other. This is a schema of responsive feeding, and what you see on the top are the structure of the feeding arrangement. So that includes healthy food, and it includes a pleasant setting and some consistencies in terms of the behavior that's expected. And what you see then, it represents that the child signals hunger or satiety, and then the caregiver has a perception of the child, and the caregiver's behavior depends on the perception of the child's size, the child's signals, the child's health, the child's behavior. But you have this back and forth between caregiver and child. Just to look at the structure a little more, the structure, this is set up by the caregiver. In addition to healthy food, it includes routines, consistent timing around the context or expectations, limited distractions, others eating, modeling, and ending the meal based on toddler satiety and a pleasant mood throughout the meal, as you can see in the pictures on the right, with multiple family members eating, toddlers clearly engaged and feeding themselves at this point. So these are some of the references that I've used during the talk. These are all available in the volume that is being published, and I thank you very much.